So from the opening panel to the cyber warfare panel, we started from how cyber accountability is everyone's business to emerging threats and how we need diverse workforce. So this leads us to the next panel, leadership diversity. So setting the tone at the top is very critical for a successful diverse workforce. So the leadership diversity panel will discuss initiatives, progress at their organizations to accelerate and improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's my pleasure to introduce one of our own, the moderator of the next panel, Lisa Roberts. As a Senior Director, HR Business Partner at Verisign, Lisa serves as a senior level consultant to management, integrating human capital needs and requirements with the overall business strategy, including workforce planning, performance management, employee relations, and succession management. She also serves as a change agent and leads talent management initiatives to attract, retain, develop, and engage Verisign talent. She has been instrumental in helping expand Verisign's employee resource groups and co-leading our Black employee resource group, Believe. Welcome, Lisa Roberts, and the rest of the panel.
Thank you. So I have an illustrious panel with me today. First, we have Latoya Asia, Vice President of Employee Engagement and Talent Strategy with Dominion Energy. Welcome, Latoya. Next, we have Daria Bahrami, Lead Cyber Threat Intelligence Analyst with Deloitte Technology. Next, we have Colin Doherty, CEO of Vercara. And last but not least, we have Wendy McSweeney, Executive Vice President, Diverse Segments Impact Advisor with Truist Commercial Community Bank. So welcome, everyone. So as you heard, we have a very diverse background of panelists speaking today, which I'm sure we'll find exciting. We have obviously a leader of an organization. We have people on the ground doing strategic oversight to improve diversity and inclusion at their organizations. One thing I'd like to hear from each of you is when you think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and obviously we can't forget belonging, we often refer to these as DEIB. What does this mean to you personally, and what does this mean to you professionally? And I'll take it to the end with Ms. Latoya.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. This is an area that I'm extremely passionate about, and I would say when I think about DEIB, I think about numbers, I think about actions, and I think about feelings. And I know sometimes in the workplace people want to stay away from feelings, but that is the belonging piece. So I would say I think about diversity as representation, purely representation, things that you can and cannot see about people. I love the analogy of the iceberg. You know, you see things at the top, you can see perhaps age, race, gender, things like that. But there's so many things at the bottom of the iceberg that you cannot see, and those things should still be looked at as representation in the workforce. So whether that's military, political affiliation, you name it, those things are what make us diverse, in diversity of thought. Inclusion, just how we embrace people in the workplace and make them feel included. So you can have people here, we could have this table that's working at the company, but if you're not including their voice, if they're not allowed in the meetings and to express the way that they feel about things and their views, there's really no point in having them. So inclusion. Equity, really I see it as leveling the playing field, right? Removing barriers, getting things out of the way to help. There's certain groups of people that have historically had challenges, whether through law or otherwise, in this country. So those are usually groups where you see kind of equity, whether it be in scholarships or other things. And then belonging, again, being the feeling piece of it. The same way that you want to feel the sense of belonging in a relationship, in any other family situation, friend situation, it's the same thing. People really want to feel that sense of belonging in the workplace, which is different from just being included. So actually feeling like you belong in the place. So for me personally, I would say what it means to me, I took a year off maybe about 10 years ago to teach overseas in Niger and West Africa. And that to me, while I had been doing DE&I work, just woven into other things, that was really a wake-up call for me for the privilege that I have just as an American, military bred, and just for the ability that I have to use my legs and arms and all the things just seeing people who simply because of where they were born, just were in a very different state, right, and levels and access to education. So it's very important to me, and that's kind of what shifted a lot of my mentality in the space. So thank you, and great to be here.
Thanks, Latoya. What about you, Colin?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think in the CEO role, you're paid to solve problems, generally. And the job doesn't exist if things are going well, always. So I think getting a team that doesn't think like you is important. You want complementary skill sets, perspectives, ideas, angles, thoughts, directions that are different than the way you think. So hiring people that look like you doesn't necessarily drive the best company. And I think that in today's world, we're in the cybersecurity world. Most of you who hit Amazon for shopping probably unconsciously use us every day. And so we just are looking for how can we drive different mindsets, different perspectives into the workforce, be that engineering, be it QA, be it marketing, be it sales, be it BDRs, SDRs, HR, you name it. We're looking to drive different ideas and different perspectives on how we solve problems. Because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is about solving problems. It's about threats, it's about attacks, it's about patterns, it's about analysis, and it's about perspectives from our entire group. So, we ask people, don't tell me what you think I want to hear, tell me what you think. And that's different. And so getting diverse ideas in the company around how we build a better mousetrap, how we build a better business, and how people can get career paths forward is kind of how I think about diversity from a point of view of, race, creed, color, whatever it may be. But we're looking for ideation. We're looking for people with different ideas than my ideas. Because if it's just me, trust me, we're not going to do great. We'll do okay, but we're not going to do great. So that's how I think about diversity generally.
Okay, thank you. Wendy.
Yeah, I think a lot of what's been said kind of echoes it from a workplace perspective. We all want to feel valued, inspired to live out whatever purpose your organization has, and you want to feel like you belong to something meaningful. And so, from a work perspective, it's creating an environment where people can show up authentically who they are. I'm not a fan of bring your whole self to work. I don't think anybody wants all of me. I think you compartmentalize those, bring your best self, right? Your authentic self, but I'm a different person with my sister than I am with my grandmother, than I am with my niece and my nephew as examples. And so I think you should, have the ability to bring your best self to work. For me personally, my life has been just a series of things that if I allowed society to dictate me, I wouldn't be where I am today. And so, just having the ability to accept people for who they are, get to know people that are different, and embrace those things really drive who I am. I really believe I was created to bring people together to drive change, and so having an opportunity to work in the space for as long as I have was really important to me. I've only worked in financial services, so 29 years in the business between 3 banks. I've bounced around, but just three organizations, and have had an opportunity to do some really creative things. So personally, it's allowing people to bring their strengths. It's not easy. I think sometimes it's easier to have groupthink, but you don't get the innovation and creativity that you need if you have, a lot of sameness around the table. And I think that's, everything from race and gender that we talk about to age, to region or country where you're born, to tenure in the organization, to background. And we look at it from a variety of different angles so that you get the most innovation and the most creation out of it. Mm-hmm. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We probably would love to see your full self at work. Daria, what about you?
I would have to agree with what everyone said so far, and I realize I'm probably the most junior person on this panel right now, but I think diversity is very personal. I mean, we can categorize it however you want, but each of our individual journeys allows us to get to where we are today. And we have to fight for ourselves and advocate for our skills and our interests. And I think that's incredibly important for every person to understand their value add and to have that level of confidence in what you can bring to the table, no matter where you come from. And I was raised by 5 very strong, independent Iranian women. I come from a very specific estrogen-filled household, and that worked to my advantage because I didn't see barriers. I saw these women do whatever they wanted. And then I got to college and I thought, okay, I'm gonna do whatever I want, and I wanted to study security. And it never dawned on me that coming from an Iranian background would pose challenges, that I would have questions raised at me. Can we trust you? Do we really know what your alliances are? And how can I really prove that? You know, how can any individual really prove their value add if they're immediately shut out from the get-go? And that ended up working to my advantage because I wound up at National Geographic doing fundraising for conservation efforts, which is not what I studied. And I don't know how they picked me. I went into the interview and I was like, are you sure? I can throw military terminology at you all day long, but you want me to talk about whales with donors? Okay. And it gave me a great perspective because I learned in design and marketing, and now in my cyber threat intel role, I finally was able to break in, thankfully. And I've been able to bring that strategic visual mindset, look at our presentations and our decks, be the creative thinker in the room and say, listen, this color scheme isn't working, or if we want to talk about the malware variants from this threat actor, let's describe it in a way where our audiences from different technical backgrounds can actually understand it, so we're not making anyone feel stupid because we're using too many acronyms or technical details that aren't necessarily a given in every workforce. So it worked out, but it's just one of those things where every individual has to really believe that they should be in the room and that their voice deserves to be heard. So I think as long as everyone takes that away from here, that's a win.
Sometimes the paths we don't anticipate, the paths we're going to go are the best ones. So I'm sure many of us remember 2020. A lot of things happened in 2020. We had COVID, who entered all of our lives. We had, tragic deaths with George Floyd. We had high increases in Asian hate crimes, and it was a year that probably none of us will ever forget. And Asia, you have a very interesting story. Talk about taking a different path. So prior to the pandemic, you were mainly in employment law, and you decided to get in diversity, equity, inclusion. And I can remember one of my leaders said, "Why would you ever do that? It sounds like such a painful job, and what are we trying to fix?" And I said, we should always be trying to improve our organizations. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about your story. What made you pivot at really the height of the turmoil of DEI?
Well, sometimes I think back and think I was crazy, but no, 2020 was an interesting year, and I think like most of us, there was a lot of self-reflection, and there were just a lot of turning points that were happening at the same time. So I was, as mentioned, employment lawyer for most of my career at a law firm and then in-house in a couple of companies, and so I was at E-Trade Financial Corporation for about 5 years. And so in the beginning of 2020, we announced that we were going to be purchased by Morgan Stanley, which was a great thing. And that's, those two companies are together now. But that was a time for me to step back. And then we all went out of the office, the following month for the pandemic. So that was a time for me to really reflect, like, this could be a great time to transition. I loved E-Trade, but it's going to be different. Small company going into a really, really large company, law department, like 600 times the size of the law department at E-Trade. So I started really reflecting on, what am I really passionate about? What are the things that I really get joy out of? And at E-Trade, I helped stand up all the DE&I efforts while I was in the law department. So our DE&I committee, our ERGs, we didn't have any of those things when I joined, and so really worked grassroots to help build those up. And I really just loved that. And I really then started thinking, well, I'm doing all these things that are really DE&I, like outside of work, all the boards I sit on, the panels that I speak at, like they always have this thread of connection. So I started looking for roles, and this was about, and I was sharing earlier with Lisa, this was about 2 months before George Floyd's murder that I was having all these reflections. So while DE&I was a topic that people were talking about and companies were really trying to make headway, it was not what it was going to be like, after that 2 months. So I was in the middle of interviewing when he was murdered. And so needless to say, a lot of the companies were trying to then speed up efforts. So that's kind of how I kind of stepped back into it, and I just felt like this was the right time. So then I transitioned into Dominion Energy, which we are, I'm sure many of you, most of you have no choice, but you are our customers, thank you. But we do a lot, for those of you who know the community work, we do a lot in the community. So we have, of course, a lot of internal DE&I efforts, which is what really attracted me to the company. When I lived in Richmond, I would observe a lot of the work that Dominion did in the community. So we do a lot of community work that touches DE&I, but also internally with our employees. And so I'm really just honored to be in this role in this capacity now. I did join in the law department, but then about a year later pivoted into this area. So I now have oversight for all of the talent strategy, which includes diversity, equity, and inclusion. And quite frankly, it's just the ability to have direct impact on people and to see change. I mean, we know that DE&I work is truly a marathon. It's not a sprint. And for companies who try to it's great to have, goals, but for companies who think there's going to be something solved, not likely, right? This is something that we just have to keep working at. And the panel before that spoke, I loved kind of the back and forth on, having a separate cyber entity versus having it embedded within armed forces, because I think that's the back and forth that people have with DE&I. It's, do you have it within HR? Do you have it, reported to the CEO? And optically, what does that look like? If you have it within HR, it looks like, okay, here's this one group that is solely responsible for handling DE&I for the company. And we know that that can't be right? It needs to be embedded within every leader, within every meeting, within every ounce of the organization, or it's just not going to happen. So that's something that I'm very passionate about. And it was an interesting time to transition, but it's been going well.
Yeah, DEI is definitely everyone's responsibility. We can't do it just in the HR team, as we all know. So Colin, you've heard her story, and we also know in 2020, a lot of women decided to leave the workforce. I mean, Will showed an astronomical stat of 40% of women leaving. Obviously, we can't afford to lose women in cybersecurity. We just don't have that many. And according to ISC Square Cyber Workforce Study in 2022, women made up about 24% in cybersecurity, 11% in C-suite. As a CEO, tell me, what are some of your initiatives that your company is doing to attract women, retain, and develop them?
Yeah, I was actually shocked at the 40% number that Will presented. I mean, I had no idea that that was even a statistic. I thought the tide was going the other way, frankly. So I learned a little bit there. I mean, our company, we have 24% of our company are female. 37% are minority-based. Our head sales lead in the U.S. is female. Our CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, is female. We have a lot of women in BDR, SDR, account management roles and sales lead roles as well. We have a number of women in the engineering group. And again, back to my earlier comment, I think people think differently, and when you have diversity of thought, you have faster solution opportunities. If you hire people that look like you and think like you, you're going to get ideas that sound like you. That's not what you want. You want people to pressure your thought process and come up with different angles. So we have a number of women in senior positions. We have, as a company, we joined the CEO for Action, Diversity, and Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. There's 2,400 companies in the U.S. and around the globe that are members of that. And so we have a DEI&B committee. We have an ERG group. We report out to the board on what our goals and directions and strategies are around that. And so, even our cyber board member, she sits on our board and sits above data governance, GCS oversight, compliance, and risk. She's female. CISO for a healthcare company. So when we can go and make those decisions, I think having women in executive teams, and I've been on all male executive teams before, it's not a great experience because it tends to be a little old boy club, a little boorish, a little bit, lacks a little bit of finesse, I would say. And I think having women in those environments drives, frankly, better behavior and drives better results. Mm-hmm. And it's true. If you sit on an all-white male executive team, it can get a little jingoistic, and you can kind of lose the place pretty fast. And I think getting more balance, more perspective, and different deportment is better. People behave better when women are around. It's a shocking thing to say, but
Sounds
it's
like
true.
men are not behaving, is what you're saying.
Well, I think there can be that sort of tribalism sometimes around trying to win a competitive deal or whatever it may be that brings out sometimes the worst in people. And I think just a little bit of balance is a good thing. I'm a big fan of balance. I think polarized views are interesting, but when you think about decisions you've made in your company, in your life, it tends to be more towards the center. Right? It's rare that you go far right or far left and say, that was an awesome idea, I'm glad I did that. It tends to sort of coalesce around the middle, and I think we've certainly put a huge focus on that in the company. Our head HR lead, Nikisha, who's here today, is female. Chiquita, who runs our recruitment, is female. So we also look at the recruitment side and what sort of talent and skills can we bring in that continues to drive that 24% number up. And I think, stats I've read around security and women in cybersecurity specifically is that, it's predicted to be 35% in 2031, not 24% in 2023. So, and it was 10%, 10 years ago. So it is increasing. And I think the other thing to consider, and there was some discussion around NASA earlier on in one of the early panels, if you're sitting with an iPhone in your pocket right now, you've got more computing power in that iPhone than existed when Apollo 13 was launched. And so the amount of digital natives that are around in your families, 8-year-old girls and boys can program the remote, and most of you can't, if you're honest with yourself, right? So that generation is going to become the next cybersecurity professional workforce, and I think it's just going to build on itself because digital natives are everywhere. They're 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and diverse genders, diverse backgrounds are going to start filling this industry. So we certainly see it, and I think there's a tremendous benefit in our company of having diversity around the table.
And we know when we're recruiting people, the first thing they do is look at the executive team,
Yeah,
right? And
that's
so
right.
our millennials, and I hate to use that term because it makes me feel so old when I'm not, but our millennials, that's the first thing they do. They look at what's the diversity of the organization. They want to see who's sitting at the table because they want to see themselves potentially there one day. So
Absolutely right, yep.
Kudos to you and your team. Wendy, would love to hear about some of the initiatives that your organization is driving, and what do you feel has been the most significant impact, not only to benefit your employees, but your customers?
Yeah. So I'm consider it an honor to share that the DEI strategy we have today, I created. So my first 8.5 years with the company, first 8.5 years with the company, I was the Chief Diversity Officer, responsible for building our people strategies. So not just how we recruit, but how we grow them, develop them, sponsor them, and then ultimately retain them. And we tracked and measured that. For our communities, and Truist is a combination of BB&T and SunTrust, so two very deep community-driven organizations. We merged at the end of 2019 to come together as Truist. So my first 6 years, I was the Chief Diversity Officer on the SunTrust side. We took that strategy, brought it over to Truist, and continued to focus on what we were doing in our communities. We have a huge supplier strategy. So our head of supplier diversity, Lisa Miller, joined the bank 10 years ago, 3 months before I did. So we kind of built our strategies together. She's grown that from 3% base with diverse spend to now almost 20%. So really excited about that. And the one area where I saw we had a great opportunity is what are we doing for our diverse business owners? So we have strategies in the retail space, we have strategies for our teammates, we have strategies for the community, we have strategies for the supplier. We weren't doing anything really focused around it from a customer-based perspective, which brings me to the role that I'm in today. So I was sharing with them earlier, second time in my career, got an opportunity to write my own job description, and so I call on women and diverse business owners, privately held companies, 25 million to 500 million in top line revenue. There are people out here, business owners out here, and we did the research. Like, they kept looking at me sideways when I was like, okay, I'm a shareholder of this company. What are we doing to grow business differently than what we're doing today? And we did the research and realized we were capturing a very small share of the market, even in the markets where we were the #1 bank. And so I get to travel around the country, and I hope nobody's recording this part, but I say the company pays me to, travel around the country and build trust with women and diverse business owners. So I get to, meet people like Debbie and Mary Beth, or Fawn Weaver, who's the CEO of Uncle Nearest, if you know that brand at all, or Troy Taylor, who is the largest Coke bottler, right, African-American male, to civil rights attorney Ben Crump. Get to partner with him and represent the organization in that way, and we're growing business around it. So we've done a lot of really good things from a teammate perspective. I could speak to some of that, but I don't want to take up all the time. And I love what we're doing with our supplier initiatives, the sponsorship program. So David Weaver, who leads our commercial bank, was my sponsor. Hence, I'm now working in his organization. And so, you rarely hear you say, oh, why would you take that DEI job? You'll never be able to get out of HR. I was able to get out of HR and move back to the revenue side of business. Oh my God, what happened? You took a demotion. You used to report to the head of HR. Now you report to someone who reports to the C-suite. And I'm like, well, I don't know how you define demotion, but for me, demotion is cut in pay and cut in responsibilities, and neither of those things happen. So, and so, it's just been a really rewarding time to sit in this space, work through the time when not only George Floyd, but Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and all the things that were happening during that time, see how the organization, galvanized around that, what was happening with Asian hate crimes. The same thing was happening in the Hispanic Latinx community. A lot was happening in the LGBTQ+ community at the same time. And we responded, I think, in a very positive way. And so, Dom Grooms leads it for us now, and they're doing some even more exciting work and space in that. And I tell everybody I get to still do the passion work. I just don't have to teach grown people how to play nice in the sandbox anymore. So I'm excited about that piece of it too.
Well, I love the supplier diversity that you brought in, because I think a lot of times when we are in our organizations, we really think about just our employees, right? Not what the impact is from the external piece. So very powerful. Daria, I know you used to work for Our Street Initiative, or Institute, and you supported Making Space, which was obviously stewarded legislation providing solutions to promote equity and inclusion in cybersecurity. Would love to hear about this initiative and how it shaped you to your career at Deloitte today.
Sure. Well, the one thing I want to emphasize is that, as everyone's already discussed, we can't promote diversity in a vacuum. It's very important to have support from your team, management, to have those conversations on the ground, and no single person can ever push anything out the door. Making Space was a particularly special project, and I was very privileged to be a part of that whole initiative. I supported Tatiana Bolton and Jumoke Dada, who were pulling this forward, and it started out as a coalition of 40 very reputable organizations that agreed to work with us and share the mic in cyber and all of these other stakeholders to bring more diverse representation on their panels. And it's a small but very significant step, because having that representation as you're talking about critical issues, especially in cyber, it just inspires more people to join the workforce. It shows different perspectives, all of the points that we've just addressed. This initiative also helped bring about Cyberbase, which created a database of talent. So we would have diverse and minority members join the Cyberbase listserv, and then if there were speaking opportunities or moments where we could pull them into the fold and connect them with each other, it allowed, again, for more dialogue. And it was a very impactful initiative that really made a positive change in a lot of lives. And then we took those steps a bit further. We worked with some congressional representatives And months after this initiative started to take off, Congressional Representative VC, he introduced a Cyber Clinic Act that would help bring funding into underserved educational institutions and provide that grant money for cyber clinics, which would functionally serve the same as legal clinics, medical clinics, and give students an opportunity to get that hands-on training and also help their communities. And I know this has continued to spin off. A number of other companies have continued to push this forward. So it was just it was an incredibly insightful experience to sit alongside change makers in the industry, people who care about making a difference, are ready to put their money where their mouth is and actually bring more diverse voices into the fold. Because words matter and pledges matter, and it's very important to start with that, but then you have to act on it. What are you actually going to do about the words that you're putting on your marketing page, the messaging that you're spewing out? You have to back it up for that credibility to stay there. And I ended up taking all of those experiences working with diverse thought leaders into my now role as a cyber threat intel analyst at Deloitte. And I had the privilege of stepping up as an interim lead for the productions and dissemination team, which is really just the marketing head of the threat intel operation. So you see all of these products come through the production line, and how do we get them to our stakeholders in a way that makes them care or actually know what we're talking about. And the cool thing about my team, for better or for worse, is we're very international. So we have colleagues based out of Spain, India, Australia, and we work round the clock with them. So we'll be taking calls at different hours of the day. And what's really great about that exposure is, though, when I'll talk to colleagues in the APAC region, the Asia Pacific region, they'll make very good points of, we're talking about China nexus threats, we're talking about threat actors who are in that region, and they're targeting or deploying malware against maybe more Western organizations. How are we going to ensure that that message doesn't ostracize the audience that we're delivering it to? So if we're talking to colleagues in the China member firm and we're talking about China nexus threat actors, how are we ensuring that we're offering that inclusivity and not pushing them out of the room because we're painting this picture that conflates threat actors with individuals who are just trying to do their jobs? And I think that's a really important distinction, because as we keep pushing through these conversations, we want to pull people into the fold. We have to remember that we're all human beings, and even the threat actors have their motives. I'm not saying they're great, but a lot of them make money off of their actions. Some of them need that economic incentive to put food on the table, to be able to carry their families through different ordeals. It's not a justification for causing harm. I don't want to make that assumption, but we have to remember to humanize the people that we're talking to and not make these blanket categorizations that this country or this organization is bad. So that's been a really wonderful journey to be on, and to just hear all these different perspectives, learn how we can be more inclusive and thoughtful with each other.
So a lot of these different programs that you all have talked a little bit about in your organizations, there's no one way to do DEI. Everyone has to do what works for their organization at the pace it works. I'm curious to hear from any of you. I think the biggest thing we all get asked often is, how are we measuring the effectiveness of these programs? What can we do to ensure the investment of time and energy and resources really matters? Wendy, I'll look to you if you want to talk a little bit about how you're measuring these effectiveness of the programs.
Yeah, so we look at the data. I think you can look at data and tell whatever story you want to tell, right? So we look at the percentage of, you name it. We look at it by tenure, we look at it by age group. There are 5 generations in the workforce now, so we talk a lot about the millennial generation. The next generation is here, and they're in the workforce as well. And so measuring the effectiveness, I think you could look at data, set aspirations around it. Certain goals are illegal, so we call them aspirations. Set aspirations around it. But you really can tell if an organization is doing well because you don't have a problem recruiting. You don't have a problem retaining talent. You're seeing people get stretch assignments by individuals who may not have the same background. So the measurement, yes, we look at data and we look at a lot of different data. Colin talked about the board. Our board is very interested in what we're doing in the space as well. But for me, it's the experience people have. Like, again, do you feel valued? Do you feel inspired to live out, in this case, Truist's purpose of inspiring and building better lives and communities? You know, are you willing to remain here inside of the organization? And, you know, we have really great retention, even during the time where we saw a huge mass exodus. The Great Resignation is what it was called. You know, we were retaining our female talent. And I think it's because people really feel connected. They have that sense of belonging inside of the organization.
You talk about connectedness, because Latoya and I were talking about that earlier, when a lot of people changed employers during the pandemic, and that connectedness is different now, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going into an office 5 days a week. You're not seeing those same people. And how do we continue to build that connectedness? And one of the things that we've seen a lot about is, and hear about, is return to work, right? I don't think a day goes by that we don't see something on the news that talks about that. And according to Upwork, by 2025, there's estimated 22% of the workforce will be remote. Obviously, the highest is in computer and IT. Any type of strategy shifts that your organizations have taken, obviously post-pandemic, knowing that remote is here to stay? Is there any different things that you've done from a DEI perspective? Latoya?
Yeah, I'll jump in. and I think, you know, picking up on what Wendy said with measuring just the survey, and I think this gets into the return to work as well, because we do look at engagement surveys to kind of, you know, get a sense of the climate. So whether that's DE&I or just more generally, but certainly cutting the data by different demographics to just get an understanding of how the people feel, because I really do think that is a really key metric. But we actually surveyed our employees. Of course, you know, as an energy company, there were a number of employees who just simply could not work from home. A lot of our employees, frontline folks that had to continue going, and, you know, were customer facing and continuing to, you know, storm duty and all the things that we're responsible for, of course, as an energy company. And so but then there are people who do work in the office, and we recognize that those people still got their jobs done. And, you know, we also recognize the climate, the labor market crisis. So with certain roles, cybersecurity, IT, finance, some of the roles where people were getting, you know, paid 3-4 times the same amount, or the amount they're getting paid at our company, to work fully remote. So we had to do something right. So we definitely wanted to hear the voice of our employees, like, what are you actually seeking? You know, we quickly realized people don't want 100% remote. They just want some flexibility. So, you know, and that could be from a DE&I perspective, you know, primary child caretakers, whoever, you know, was taking more responsibility in the household, whether that be man, woman, you know, whomever in a family. And so we recognize that, you know, we need to have some sort of hybrid arrangement. So we are 3 days in the office and 2 days out. There are teams that can, you know, leaders have the discretion to have some flexibility there. There's some teams that work, you know, every week, and then the next week they're off, like in our IT organization. So trying to, you know, create a little bit of flexibility so that people can work just for their, you know, work for the day, work for the team. The whole spirit of this is collaboration. So you don't want people coming in and feeling like they're just sitting at a desk by themselves. So really trying to encourage people to, when you do come in, try to collaborate, try to meet with other teams. And I think that that's really been helpful. It seems like employees enjoy having that opportunity. But again, I'm always very mindful of the fact that we have people that just can't do that. And so we try to be very sensitive to that when we talk about kind of return to work, because they never left work, right? So.
And obviously collaboration is key to just the inclusion and belonging piece, right? If you take that away, then some of that goes away with it. So as we are keeping everyone from lunch, which want to think about any advice that all four of you would give our audience today to help them in their own diversity, equity, inclusion journey. And I'll start with Wendy to my left.
Yeah, I've always leveraged my difference as a carrot, right? It was the fact that, you know, I was raised by a single mom, you know, lived in Richmond, Virginia, went to inner city schools, and I went to the county schools for high school, and it had my own unique experience even in that, to going to college, to pledging. Like, being different has always been my secret sauce, right? That's been the secret sauce. And figure out what that is for you and allow that to be your secret sauce. I walked in today and someone kept offering me a seat. And I was like, oh no, I'm fine, oh no, I'm fine. And finally they were like, no, sit down. And so I go to sit down and Renata goes, how much do you pay her? And I'm like, pay who? It's like, your handler. And I'm like, handler? I don't have a handler. And she goes, oh, you don't? I said, Dag, I must really look like a boss. When you walk in the room, own it and make everybody think you got a handler.
Well said. Well said.
Colin, do you want to follow after that?
It's a tough act to follow. I don't have a handler either. No, I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and change. Change is a constant. People have said that all the time. Embrace it, don't fight it, right? I mean, this is one of the fastest moving landscapes in any industry out there. We did not leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones, right? People found different ways to do things and quicker, faster, better, more efficient. And so it's always, what else can you do to affect change and better results? At the end of the day, running a business that's status quo is not fascinating. Just isn't, right? You want to do something that's creating footprints in the sand, footprints in the snow, places people have never been there before. That's what's exciting, and diversity is at the core of that. You need people who think differently than you, who look differently than you, and you come up with better ideas as a team. To me, that's kind of what embodies it from the seat I sit in.
Thank you. Daria.
I would just say emotional intelligence is going to be key in a lot of these conversations. Mm-hmm. It's an undervalued trait. It's hard to teach if it's not intuitive to you, but taking that time to train yourself, your colleagues, have those conversations and figure out how to just assess where everyone's at and where the mood is, that's going to take everyone a really long way.
And I would just say DE&I obviously is very important, but just try not to put people into boxes. We didn't talk about intersectionality, but people intersect, right, in all kinds of different categories. Myself, I'm Black, Hispanic, woman, all these different things that make me who I am. So to be put into a box simply because of gender or race or what people might perceive that to be, that's uncomfortable, and that can have the opposite effect of what we're trying to achieve. So in doing all the things that we're talking about, really just be mindful, and Daria hit it on, we're all people, humanize them, we're individuals. We have differences, we are all very different. This room is very diverse, I love seeing it. But we just need to realize that we are individuals, and every one of us, doesn't matter gender, race, where you're born, we all have something to contribute, and we collectively make diversity. Diversity is not a person. I am not diverse. The collective is diverse. So just keeping that in mind, and that we all have individual value, is what I want to leave.
So thank you all for sharing your stories, your insight, your programs. I think one of the things that we all need to think about as we head out to go eat, we're all leaders here. And so with leaders, we need to own that. We need to commit to one thing. If you think about today, commit to one of those things that you're going to go back and you're going to commit to making something better at your organizations or for your team in the belonging and inclusion space. Thank you.